She thought kindness from men was a trap. The human proved her wrong every day. The alarm had been screaming for 4 minutes when Callum Reyes finally got his left boot on. He ran through the corridor with the lace still undone, dodging a cart of coolant canisters and a technician who yelled something in Korean that he didn't catch. The mech bay smelled like ozone and burnt polymer, the way it always did before a deployment. Something in the pre-ignition cycle cooked the seals and left a sharp, sweet edge in the air that Callum had stopped noticing 2 years ago. He noticed it now. He noticed everything now. His hands were steady, but his chest was doing something complicated. There was a new pilot in Bay 7. He'd been told last night. Briefing packet, 12 pages, dense with interspecies diplomatic language and physiological adjustment protocols, and a sentence near the bottom, almost buried, that said the Alliance co-pilot assigned to the KR-9 resonance frame had prior combat experience with synchronized neural lattice systems, but no documented history with acoustic kinetic interfaces, which was the bureaucratic way of saying she had never driven a mech by dancing. Callum had read that sentence 4 times. He pushed through the bay door and there she was. Velkara stood beside the resonance frame's boarding ladder with her arms folded across her chest, and her eyes fixed on the mech's left knee joint the way a surgeon looks at a patient who has arrived late and is clearly going to be difficult. She was tall, most of the Verkai were tall, and her skin held that deep-water iridescence, blue-black shifting to copper when the overhead light caught it at an angle. Her secondary lids were half-closed, which Callum had learned from the briefing packet meant either deep focus or deep skepticism, and given that her mouth was doing a flat, still thing, he suspected it was the latter. She turned when she heard his boots. She looked at him, she looked at his undone lace, she looked at his face again. "You are the primary pilot," she said. It was not a question. "Callum Reyes," he extended his hand. She looked at his hand. "Verkai don't," she began. "I know," he said. "I read the packet, I just thought maybe." He let his hand drop without embarrassment, without visible wound. "Sorry, habit." She watched him for another moment. The secondary lids moved. Something in her posture recalibrated, nearly imperceptible, the way a very controlled person resets when a situation doesn't develop the way they expected. "The Kaiju signature was confirmed 12 minutes ago," she said. "Coastal approach, estimated landfall in 43 minutes. Then we should talk while we suit up." He moved toward the locker bank, pulling his uniform jacket from its hook. "You reviewed the acoustic kinetic interface." "I reviewed it. And it is irrational." He laughed, not a dismissive laugh, not a patronizing one, the kind that comes from genuine recognition, from having thought the exact same thing yourself. "Yeah," he said, "it really is. It works anyway." She said nothing, but she watched him. He didn't try to fill the silence with more words. He finished suiting up with efficient, unhurried movements, and she noted that he was not performing calm, he simply was calm. His heart rate was not elevated by her presence, or if it was, he had learned to wear stillness over it like a second skin. Among her kind, this would mean indifference. She was already adjusting the translation. Humans were different, she knew this. She had been briefed extensively. She had read reports and cross-cultural analyses and first contact summaries written by 6 different xenosociologists, and every single one of them agreed on one foundational point. Human emotional expression and human intention were not reliably correlated in either direction, and any assumption based on cross-species behavioral mapping would produce conclusions that were wrong in ways that were specifically, precisely, dangerously wrong. She had understood this intellectually. She was beginning to understand it in her body. He bent down and tied his boot. She climbed the boarding ladder. The KR-9 resonance frame was 31 meters tall, bipedal, with a thoracic cavity built around 2 parallel acoustic kinetic platforms. Sensor arrays in the shape of large floor panels, pressure-mapped, motion-sensitive, calibrated to translate human movement patterns into servo commands across the mech's entire skeletal system. The theory was borrowed from an old entertainment technology, retrofitted through 3 generations of increasingly desperate engineering. And it worked because human bodies had an innate kinetic logic that conventional control systems couldn't replicate at the speed a mech combat scenario required. You thought too slowly with your hands. But your feet, synchronized with music, with rhythm, with something that lived below the cognitive layer, that moved at the speed the machine needed. The cockpit was split, 2 platforms side by side, each occupying half the thoracic bay. Callum took the left, Velkara took the right. She stepped onto the platform and the system registered her mass, her stance, the specific gravity distribution of her species. The interface ran a calibration sequence. She stood still through it, arms at her sides, secondary lids fully open now, reading every display, cataloging every variable. "The music begins on my mark," Callum said through the shared comm. "It's going to feel strange at first, don't think about it, just let your body track the beat. The mech does the translation. You just have to be present." "Define present." He considered the question seriously, which she noted. "Don't be somewhere else in your head. Whatever you're carrying, doubts, plans, previous experience, set it down for the duration. Be in the body, be in the moment. That's all." Velkara had spent 11 years in the Verkai Perimeter Defense Force, 6 of them in active combat roles. She had piloted 3 different synchronized neurolattice systems, each requiring absolute cognitive discipline, the complete subordination of the emotional state to the operational matrix. She was not accustomed to being told to feel things. She was accustomed to being told to suppress them. She kept this to herself. "Understood," she said. "One more thing," Callum said. "We're going to sync." The deeper the sync, the better the mech responds. It's bilateral, both platforms feed the system, and when they're harmonized you get close to full capability. When they're not, you get— He paused. "What?" "You get a 31-meter-tall machine, tripping over its own feet." She processed this. "How do we achieve this synchronization?" "Same way 2 people do anything together. We pay attention to each other." The comm went quiet. Somewhere below the cockpit, the city's emergency sirens shifted pitch. 41 minutes, they were almost out of time. "Mark," Callum said, and the music began. She had expected something martial, something driving and aggressive, something built for the functional purpose of moving a weapon system. What she got was a rolling, syncopated rhythm that felt like water, not the flat water of a still surface, but the complex water of a river over stones, layered, unpredictable in the micro but coherent in the macro. She stood on the platform and felt the bass frequency travel through the soles of her feet, and she thought, absurdly, of the tide pools on Verkai Prime, the way the secondary ocean moved, and then she pushed the thought away and tried to find the beat. She found it, lost it, found it again. Below them, the resonance frame moved, a lurch, a correction, a halting sequence that was recognizable as walking only in the most generous interpretation. The city's combat coordination grid showed their position. 2 blocks from the coastline, the kaiju's projected approach corridor cutting directly through a dense residential zone. "You're in your head," Callum said, "not a criticism, an observation. I am attempting to establish the mathematical relationship between the rhythmic pattern and the motor output." "That's in your head." "I am aware that is what I said." "Just step," he said. "Don't calculate, step." "That is not a meaningful instruction." "It's the only one that works. Left foot on the 2. She put her left foot on the 2. The mech's left hip rotated. Across the grid, the frame's stride lengthened by 40%. "There," Callum said. "That's it. Don't think about why, just keep going." She kept going. The kaiju breached the shoreline 22 minutes later. A Type IV classification, mass approximate to 11,000 metric tons, exoskeletal plating across 60% of its body surface, 2 primary manipulation limbs, and 4 articulated secondary limbs at the thoracic segment. It moved with the particular quality of something that had been in the ocean for a long time and found land an inconvenient compromise. The city's defense grid lit up with evacuation corridors and engagement vectors, and Callum took a breath that Velkara, through the newly live biometric sync, felt in her own ribcage. The first engagement lasted 7 minutes. It went badly. Not catastrophically, not lethally, but badly in the way that 2 people who do not yet know how to move together go badly. The mech's right side responding to Velkara's technically correct but contextually misaligned movements, while Callum tried to compensate, the combination producing a pattern that was neither of them and served neither purpose. The kaiju hit them twice, registered impacts that rattled the cockpit and sent both pilots stumbling on their platforms. Velkara caught herself with a hand on the platform rail and came back up moving, but the interruption cost them the rhythm, and for 40 seconds the resonance frame stood in the middle of a burning block and did nothing coherent. "Back to the beat," Callum said. He said it the way you say something to yourself as much as to someone else. "I was on the beat," Velkara said, and there was an edge in it, the first edge she'd let through since they boarded. "I know, I lost it when it hit us. Come back with me." She heard that sentence. Come back with me. Not your fault, not fix yourself, not you're the problem, come back with me. As if they had both been somewhere and were going back together. She came back. They found the rhythm again at 23 seconds, and in the 24th second the resonance frame landed a strike against the kaiju's left manipulation limb that sent it staggering back 6 meters into the bay. The city's defense grid updated engagement probability. It had been 22%. It moved to 38. Still terrible, but moving. They fell back on a tactical withdrawal, pulling the kaiju's attention toward the industrial waterfront where there were fewer lives to protect, and the mech walked there in a rhythm that was smoother than it had been 40 minutes ago, the 2 pilots still not fully in sync but no longer actively working against each other. Velkara tracked every variable. Callum hummed something under his breath. She could hear it faintly through the comm, half a melody, something without words. She didn't ask what it was. She filed it. They disengaged at the 2-hour mark when the kaiju pulled back into deep water, retreating the way Sci-Fi Vs did when they sustained sufficient damage, not defeat, not death, just a calculation that the cost exceeded the return. The city grid marked it a partial success. 18 city blocks with structural damage. No casualties in the primary engagement corridor, which was the thing that mattered. The resonance frame stood knee-deep in harbor water, and Callum let out a long breath that the biometric sync relayed to Velkara as a wave of released tension moving through a human body. Something she had no exact equivalent for, this particular flavor of surviving. "Good work," he said. "We were ineffective. We were ineffective together. That's different from being ineffective separately. Tomorrow will be less ineffective." She deactivated her platform. The music cut. The sudden silence in the cockpit had a particular texture, the way silence after sustained sound carries the ghost of what was just there. "You hum," she said. A pause, "Yeah. While in combat. Is that a problem?" She considered it. In the Verkai perimeter force, vocalization during active engagement protocols was a disciplinary infraction. It indicated a failure to achieve the necessary cognitive focus, a subjective intrusion into an objective process. She had filed 2 such infractions in her career. She knew what humming during combat was supposed to mean. She did not know what it meant here. "What is the song?" she said. Another pause, this one different, softer somehow. "Something my grandmother used to sing, doesn't have a title, just a melody she made up when I was small." Velkara had nothing to say to this. She had not been prepared for it. It sat in the cockpit between them, this small warm thing, unexplained and unexplaining, not offered as a credential or a bid for sympathy, just offered, the way you tell someone a small true thing when the walls come down a little after a hard thing. She climbed down the boarding ladder first. He called down after her, "There's food in the bay station, real food, not ration packs. The ground crew always sets up after a deployment. You should eat." She had been going to go directly to the debrief room. She went to the bay station instead. The ground crew had set up a folding table with containers of food that she couldn't entirely identify, things in sauce, things wrapped in flatbread, something that smelled of acid and spice, and something sweeter underneath. There were 8 people around the table, all of them from various Earth nations, and 3 of them with mud still on their boots from the evacuation cordons. They were loud, which she had expected. They were laughing, which she had not. Callum came and stood beside her at the edge of the table. "They're laughing because they're still alive," he said quietly, answering a question she hadn't asked. "It's not disrespect, it's the opposite." She watched a woman with a shaved head tip a container toward a younger technician, and mime something that made the younger one cover her face and laugh until her shoulders shook. "Among my people," Velkara said, "survival is marked by silence. You account for the losses first, then you account for what was preserved. Then you move forward." "That sounds very clean." "It is efficient." He picked up a piece of flatbread. "We do the accounting too. We just do it loud and together, and we eat while we do it. The eating is important." He held out the flatbread. She looked at it. "There's nothing in it that'll harm Verkai physiology," he said. "I checked the nutritional compatibility report this morning. Everything on this table is safe for your digestive system." She looked at him then, not at the food but at him, at the fact that he had checked this, that before a combat deployment in whatever morning hours he had read a nutritional compatibility report for a co-pilot he had not yet met, to make sure she could eat at this table. She took the flatbread. It tasted of salt and grain and something faintly smoky, and it was, she decided, acceptable. "The song," she said, "your grandmother." She was from Oaxaca, small city in Mexico. She sang it when she made tortillas. I'd sit at the kitchen table and she'd hum this thing, and I never asked her what it was. I just knew it meant everything was okay. He paused. "I hum it when things are uncertain. It's automatic. I don't really notice I'm doing it until someone mentions it." "Why does it mean things are okay?" He thought about this. He took it seriously, as a real question deserving a real answer, which she was still adjusting to, the human habit of treating all questions as equally worthy. "Because she was calm when she sang it," he said finally. "And nothing bad ever happened in that kitchen. So somewhere in my body it means I'm going to be all right, even when I'm not sure yet." Velkara was quiet for a moment. "My people do not use music as an effective anchor," she said. "We are trained from early development to desynchronize emotional state from operational function, to keep them separate." "Does it work?" She looked at the table, at the laughing technicians, at the younger one who was still wiping her eyes. "It works well," she said, "until the moment when both systems are required simultaneously and there is no channel for them to communicate." Callum nodded. He understood what she was saying without requiring her to say it plainly, and she noted this too, filed it with the other things she was filing. "Get some sleep," he said. "The Scifi will be back. They always come back." She went to her quarters. She lay in the dark and did not sleep immediately, which was unusual for her. She lay there and reviewed the day the way she always did, systematically, operationally, cataloging what worked and what failed and what needed adjustment. When she reached the moment on the boarding ladder, she reviewed it twice. "Come back with me." She did not know what to do with it. It violated several frameworks simultaneously. In the Verkai military, a co-pilot's error during active engagement was logged, analyzed and addressed in debrief. It was not extended a hand. It was not invited back. It was not, and she searched her vocabulary carefully, comforted. She was not sure if that was what he had done. She was not sure if it mattered what she called it. She slept. The Type IV came back in 31 hours. It came at night this time, which changed the variables, the city's ambient light patterns, the visual range of the mech's secondary sensors, the psychological texture of combat in the dark. Velkara suited up in 4 minutes, which was 30 seconds faster than the previous deployment. She was on her platform before Callum finished his pre-ignition check. He noticed, he said nothing about it. "Same approach corridor?" she asked. "Different, it's learned our position." He ran the grid analysis on the secondary display. "It's coming in from the northwest, residential high-density zone. We need to intercept at the harbor mouth and turn it before it reaches the 3rd evacuation tier." Understood. She was already adjusting her stance, already reading the projected movement envelope, the synchronization. "We're better than yesterday. We need to be better than yesterday." "Yeah," he said simply, "we do." The music began. She found the beat in 3 seconds this time, not 15. She felt the difference immediately, the way the resonance frame settled into its stride, the quality of the movement shifting from mechanical approximation to something that carried weight correctly, that understood where the ground was. Callum's platform registered the synchronization index, 41%, improved from yesterday's peak of 33. Better. Not enough. The kaiju was at the harbor mouth when they arrived, and it was angrier than it had been. The retreat had not resolved whatever drove it, had only interrupted it, and it came back with something that read like intent. It struck fast, a sweeping motion with its primary limbs that the mech's early warning system flagged at 0.4 seconds before impact. They had to move, now. Velkara moved left on reflex, the correct direction in the neural lattice system she knew, the wrong direction in the acoustic-kinetic interface, because in this machine left meant something different depending on which beat you were on. The resonance frame lurched. Callum compensated. They saved it but lost 4 seconds of position, and the kaiju's second strike connected with the mech's right shoulder joint. The cockpit shook hard. Velkara's shoulder hit the platform rail. She came back up and the anger was there, not at Callum, not at herself, at the situation, at the fact that she was good at what she did, and it still wasn't enough, at the fact that this machine required something from her she didn't have the language for yet. She controlled it. She set it down in the place where she kept things that couldn't be useful right now. "Talk to me," Callum said. "I moved wrong on the second beat." "I know, it's okay. What do you need?" She blinked. In 11 years of combat operations, no co-pilot, no commanding officer, no anyone had asked her that question in the middle of an engagement. The protocol was assessment and correction, not this. "What do I need?" she repeated. "To stay in it. What helps you stay in it?" She thought for a half-second that she could not afford but took anyway. "Tell me the beat before it changes," she said. "Call it." "Every time. Until I stop needing you to." "Okay," he said, coming on the 3-2-1-3. She heard his voice and she heard the music and she heard the beat through the soles of her feet, and all 3 things landed at the same time and something in her body that had been braced let go. Not all the way, just enough. She moved on the 3 and the resonance frame moved with her, and Callum moved with the frame, and the synchronization index climbed past 41 and kept going. 48. 52. "Good," he said and called the next beat, and she moved on it, and the mech's right arm came up in a blocking motion that caught the kaiju's third strike and redirected it. Not strength, not mass, just geometry, just 2 people telling a machine where to be a half-second before it needed to be there. 59% synchronized. The kaiju pulled back, reassessing. It was not used to being redirected. It had mass and it had fury, and it had the absolute conviction of a creature that had never been refused. The mech stood between it and the city, knee-deep in harbor water, and Callum kept calling the beats and Velkara kept hitting them, and the music played, and somewhere in the machine's acoustic kinetic memory, it registered this combination of inputs as something it had never received before: two people, one rhythm, one purpose. Left on the one, Callum said. She went left on the one. The kaiju went to its knees. Not for long, not decisively, but it went to its knees, and for 3 seconds it knelt in the harbor water and looked at the resonance frame and did the whatever it was that Sci-Fi's did when they recalibrated, and the defense grid registered a probability shift that made the Combat Coordination Center audibly react on the shared channel. 63%. Hold that, Callum said. Just hold that. She held it. They drove it back at dawn. Not permanently, they all knew that. All the analysts and commanders who filled the debrief room afterward. Sci-Fi's were patient in ways that most Earth creatures were not. But they drove it back, and the engagement corridor held, and when the mech finally powered down in the harbor shallows with the sunrise coming orange and flat across the water, both pilots stood on their platforms for a moment before climbing down. Velkara looked at the synchronization index one more time. 67% at peak, a 48% improvement over their first engagement. You called every beat, she said. Until you didn't need me to, he said. Around the 40-minute mark you stopped waiting. She had not noticed that. She reviewed it now and found he was right. At some point the external call had become internal, his voice absorbed into her own timing, the rhythm no longer something she was chasing but something she was carrying. That is how the neural lattice sync works, she said slowly. The external scaffold becomes internal architecture. I should have recognized the parallel. Different shape, same principle. Yes. She climbed down the ladder. He followed. On the ground in the early light, the bay smelled of salt water and spent fuel, and the ground crew was already moving, running diagnostics, calling to each other in the overlapping shorthand of people who have worked together a long time. One of them, the woman with the shaved head, raised a fist in Velkara's direction, without looking up from her diagnostic panel. It was, she had learned, a gesture of recognition, acknowledgement of shared effort. It required nothing in return, it was given freely, carrying no debt. She raised her own fist. The woman grinned at the panel. Callum appeared beside her with 2 containers of something hot. He held one out. Coffee, he said. Or the closest thing to coffee that won't destabilize your secondary metabolic system. I had the med team run the check. Again he had checked. She took the container. It was warm against her palms. You do this, she said. You check the compatibility reports, the nutritional data. You read the physiological adjustment protocols. Of course. Why? He looked at her, and she saw something in his face that she didn't have a precise word for yet. Not confusion exactly, more the look of a person for whom the answer is so obvious that the question catches them off guard. Like being asked why you breathe. Because you're here, he said, and I want you to be okay. Velkara was quiet. She held the warm container and she looked at the harbor where the dawn light was doing something particular to the water, turning it copper and gray. And she thought about her briefings, about the 6 xenosociologists and their cautions about behavioral mapping, about the ways she had been taught to interpret male intent, about the specific patterns her training identified as danger. None of them looked like this. None of them felt like this. She had been trained to watch for kindness as a vector, because among the species she had encountered most often, kindness from those in positions of proximity was almost always architecture, a structure built to produce a specific outcome, an investment expecting a specific return. She had spent 11 years distinguishing genuine care from strategic warmth, and she had learned to err on the side of skepticism, because the cost of trusting wrong was always higher than the cost of holding back. Callum Ray's made breakfasts, checked compatibility reports, called the beats in the dark, said come back with me when she faltered, hummed his grandmother's song in combat, not to impress anyone, not to signal anything, just because somewhere in his body it meant he was going to be all right. He was not performing kindness. He was simply kind. She did not have a framework for this. She would have to build one. Thank you, she said, for the coffee. Any time, he said, and meant it. The Sci-Fi came back 6 days later. It came in the early afternoon with the city half evacuated and a weather system pushing in from the coast that cut visibility to 300 meters. The harbor was the color of hammered iron. The mech's external sensors worked through it, but the human visual channel was compromised, which meant Callum was flying on instruments, and Velkara was translating grid data in real time and calling positional updates, and the roles had quietly, without either of them commenting on it, reversed. She was the one calling now. Contact at bearing 270, 400 meters, moving fast. It's going for the evacuation corridor. I see it on grid. We need to cut the angle. Left hard on the weight, she recalculated. The weather pattern, the kaiju's trajectory, the evacuation corridor's northern boundary. Not left, right, it's fainting. A half-second pause. The kind of pause that happens when a decision is being made in real time under conditions that punish wrong answers. Right, Callum said and turned right. The kaiju was where she said it would be. The resonance frame was there first. What happened in the next 40 seconds was the closest thing to language that two people can speak without words, a conversation conducted entirely in movement, in beat, in the particular attentiveness of two people who have stopped managing each other and started trusting each other. Velkara called position and beat simultaneously without being asked to, the two streams of information merging into something that sounded, on the combat channel, almost like music itself. Callum moved with it, through it, not following her but moving with her, and the mech moved with them both. Synchronization index, 74%. 78. 81. At 81%, the resonance frame did something the engineering team would spend 6 weeks analyzing. It moved with a fluidity that exceeded its published performance specifications by 22%, as if the machine had been holding something in reserve, waiting for the pilots to ask the right question. It moved through the fog like something that belonged in it, something that had been there longer than the kaiju, something patient and certain and capable. The kaiju turned. It was fast, they were faster. It struck, they weren't there. It struck again, and they were there, in the exact right position, and the resonance frame's arm came around in an arc that carried the mech's full torque, full momentum, full synchronized intent, and it connected with the kaiju's primary armored thorax with a sound that the city's seismic monitoring network registered as a 0.3 tremor. The kaiju went down. Not to its knees this time. Down fully, heavily, into the harbor shallows, sending a displacement wave across the eastern evacuation corridor that knocked over 3 empty vehicles and a portable barricade, and scattered a flock of birds that had been watching from the industrial pier. It lay there. The resonance frame stood over it in the fog, steam coming off the heat bleed vents, the harbor water still settling around its knees. Synchronization index held at 81% for 4 full seconds after the strike. The Combat Coordination Center was, for a moment, quiet. Then everybody started yelling. Velkara stood on her platform in the sudden cacophony of radio channels and cheering ground crew and the mech's own post-engagement diagnostic cycle, and she felt something she had deliberately suppressed for 11 years of combat operations. Something that was not pride exactly, not triumph exactly, something that was the overlap of both with a third thing she was only beginning to have words for. She felt, specifically, the shape of what it was like to be two people, and to have done something that neither of them could have done alone. This was not in her briefing documents. She suspected it could not be. "Hey," Callum said, and his voice in her earpiece was quiet underneath the noise. "Yes. You called the feint right. The trajectory data was clear once I applied the weather correction." "Sure, I mean, you called it right and I listened." She understood what he was saying. That this was the exchange, the particular exchange, the one that had made the difference, not her calculation and not his trust separately, but the fact that they had both done their parts at the same moment. "Yes," she said, "you listened." The kaiju did not move for 3 hours. When it finally withdrew, it went deeper than any previous retreat, into the cold, dark water where the defense grid lost contact. The Combat Coordination Center upgraded the engagement to a decisive repulsion. They had not killed it. They might never kill it. But it had learned something today, in whatever way a creature that size could learn, about the shape of what it was up against. In the debrief room 2 hours later, the base commander reviewed the synchronization data and asked what had changed between the previous engagements and this one. There was a short silence. "We stopped managing each other," Callum said. The base commander looked at him, then at Velkara. "The framework for interspecies co-pilot coordination assumes that differences in methodology require active mediation," Velkara said. "This is accurate at the early stages. It becomes inaccurate once both pilots have developed sufficient trust to allow the other's methodology to supplement rather than compete with their own." "And how do you build that trust?" the base commander asked. Velkara considered the question. "Consistency," she said, "over time, in small things as well as large." The fog burned off by evening. Callum found her on the observation deck above the mech bay, looking at the harbor. The sun was going down over the industrial district, and the water had that copper and gray quality again, the same it had the morning after the second engagement. He stood beside her, and they were both quiet for a while, which was something they were better at now than they had been a week ago. "You're going to want to send a report back to Verkai Command," he said. "I have written 3 drafts. What happened to the first 2? She was quiet for a moment. They were accurate but incomplete. What were they missing? She looked at the water. She thought about the 6 xenosociologists and their cautions. She thought about 11 years of skepticism carefully maintained, of the particular discipline of never assuming good intent, of the cost-benefit architecture that underpinned every relationship she had formed in a professional capacity. Give this much, expect this much back, trust only what is demonstrable and demonstrated. She thought about compatibility reports checked before a first meeting, about flatbread held out without expectation, about come back with me said in the dark with a kaiju on the grid. The reports assumed, she said slowly, that the operational success could be attributed to improved synchronization methodology and incremental trust building within established interspecies cooperation protocols. She paused. This is not inaccurate. But it omits the actual mechanism. She turned to look at him. The mechanism is not methodological. The mechanism is that you are genuinely kind, that I spent the first 4 days waiting for the architecture behind it, waiting for the moment when the kindness would resolve into something it had been building toward. Something that would tell me what you actually wanted. She paused again. The moment did not come. Callum said nothing. He listened. "Among the species I have encountered most frequently," Velkara said, "kindness that persists without visible agenda is either a very sophisticated architecture, or it is not kindness at all but some other thing wearing its face. My training identified no third option." "There is one," he said. "I know that now." The sun dropped below the industrial district. The harbor went dark in increments, the copper gone, the gray deepening. Somewhere below them the ground crew was running the post-engagement maintenance cycle, the sound of it coming up through the deck, voices, machinery, someone's music playing from a portable speaker. "What does your third report say?" Callum asked. Velkara was quiet for a moment. "It says that I was assigned a human co-pilot whose methods were initially irrational and whose consistent demonstration of unprompted consideration for my well-being required me to substantially revise my operational framework." She paused. "It says the revision was warranted." Callum looked at her. Something in his face was doing the warm thing again, the thing she still didn't have an exact word for, though she was getting closer. "That's a good report," he said. "It is the most accurate one I have written." They were quiet again. The speaker below was playing something she didn't recognize, a rolling, syncopated rhythm that she found, to her mild surprise, she was tracking. Counting the beat without intending to. Her foot moved slightly on the deck. Callum noticed. He didn't say anything. He just smiled, looking at the harbor. She let her foot keep moving. 3 weeks later, when the Sci-Fi came back again, they were at 91% synchronization within the first 8 minutes. The Combat Coordination Center, watching the index climb in real time, stopped what it was doing. Every analyst at every console tracked the number. When it crossed 90, the center chief, a woman with 30 years in giant form combat coordination, set down her coffee and said something quiet that nobody quite heard. In the cockpit, the music played. Velkara moved on the beat without needing it called. Callum moved beside her with her, and the resonance frame moved with both of them, and the harbor shallows barely touched its knees because they weren't standing still long enough to sink. The kaiju lasted 19 minutes. Not the kaiju's longest engagement, not its most destructive, but the one it would remember, if memory was something it had, the one where the machine it had fought 6 times before suddenly became something different, something that moved with a new quality, something that felt less like 2 people piloting a machine and more like a single intention wearing 31 meters of steel. When it went back to the deep water this time, it didn't surface again. Not that week, not that month. The defense grid monitored its signature tracking south, then east, then off the edge of the monitoring range, and the Combat Coordination Center upgraded the status to extended withdrawal, and eventually to presumed relocation, and eventually to cleared. In the debrief, the base commander asked Velkara to summarize the engagement. "We were synchronized," she said. "That's it. That's everything." Later in the bay, with the ground crew celebrating in the way the ground crew always celebrated, loud and warm and full of laughter, that was the sound of people still being alive. Velkara stood at the edge of the table where the food was laid out, and she picked up a piece of flatbread without being offered one. Callum saw her do it. He said nothing. He just moved to stand beside her, the way he always did, not in front, not behind, just beside at the same height, looking at the same thing. She had sent her third report to Verkai Command 2 weeks ago. The response had come through official channels, careful and diplomatic and thoroughly missing the point, asking for quantitative metrics on the trust-building protocol so it could be standardized and applied to future interspecies co-pilot assignments. She had written back suggesting that standardization might undermine the mechanism. She had not yet heard back. It didn't matter right now. Right now there was flatbread and there was noise and there was the sound of Callum humming, very quietly, half under his breath, the tune without words, the one his grandmother sang, the one that meant everything was okay. Velkara listened to it. She let it mean something. She hadn't meant to. She didn't plan it. But in her chest, in the place where her species kept the things they didn't say out loud, something had been quietly rearranged. The architecture her training had built, the careful scaffolding of skepticism and managed distance, no longer quite the shape it had been. It had been replaced with something that didn't have a Verkai name yet. Something that felt like the harbor at dawn, copper and gray, the water still, the sun just starting to be somewhere. Something that felt, she decided, like being okay. She stood beside him in the noise and the warmth, and she let herself be exactly where she was, which was not something she had done easily or often in 11 years. And she thought, with a precision that surprised her, a clarity she wasn't expecting, that she had been wrong. Not about the training. The training was correct about most things, for most species in most conditions. She had been wrong about humans. Or rather, she had been right that human kindness needed to be read carefully, that it could not simply be accepted at face value, that the history of every species in proximity to power supported caution. She had been wrong about this one. She had been wrong about the specific, persistent, unreasonable, deeply irrational way this one human being got up every morning and checked the compatibility reports and called the beats, and hummed his grandmother's song in the dark and said, "Come back with me." Not because he wanted anything from her, not because he was building towards something, but because he was simply, stubbornly, constitutionally incapable of being near a person and not caring what happened to them. This was not a strategy. This was just who he was. Velkara thought about writing a fourth report. She decided it could wait. She took another piece of flatbread and she listened to the song, and outside the bay the harbor water lay still and dark and quiet, the kaiju gone, the city whole, the night asking nothing from anyone. It was, by any reasonable measure, enough.